The arena lights glowed a cold blue, casting long shadows across the metal floor and walls around the training ground. The cadets stood in a wide circle, each one from a different world, each one wearing armor shaped for their species, but all facing the same space, in the center of the floor, the space that was empty for now. Above them, the dome ceiling shimmered like liquid glass, and strange runes pulsed along the edges. The runes were old, from before any of the cadets had been born, and they marked the zone where the most feared simulation in the academy would begin, the Predator simulation, the trial that separated survivors from failures. The crowd of instructors and other students sat high in the viewing tiers, their voices low, but tense. They had seen this many times before, and they knew what was about to be released. The announcer's voice cracked through the air, speaking in standard so all would understand. His tone was heavy and slow as he spoke of the rule: survive or be eliminated. The cadets gripped their weapons, some with claws, some with strange energy, spears, some with heavy shields. The air smelled of metal and cold smoke. The humans were rare in this academy, only one in this class, Rin, a tall young man with dark hair, his eyes steady as he looked toward the shimmering cage lines in the center. Rin could feel the fear moving through the others. Some shifted from foot to foot, some kept glancing at the viewing deck, as if hoping for the test to be canceled, but the cage lines began to fade, the shimmer growing weaker. The sound of deep, heavy breathing began to echo from the inside. The first shape moved into view, its body low, its movements slow and deliberate, long limbs ending in hooked claws, and a back lined with spines. Its head was narrow, with two curved tusks framing a mouth full of sharp teeth. Its eyes glowed a bright burning yellow that cut through the blue light and found the nearest movement. Gasps rose from the circle of cadets. Some stepped back, but Rin stayed where he was, the creature's head tilted slightly, as if noticing the one who did not move. It made no sound, yet its presence filled the space, pressing on the chest of everyone there. One of the cadets, a tall insectoid from the MYK race, raised a spear and shouted for the group to attack before it could leap, but the announcer's voice reminded them there was no teamwork requirement, no rule that said they had to protect each other. Every cadet was alone, and every cadet was a target. The Predator's claws scraped the floor, making a sharp screech. It took one slow step, then another. Its eyes locked on Rin, as if choosing him above all others. Rin's heart pounded, but his face remained calm. He remembered what he had read about this program. The Predator was designed to respond to fear, to aggression, to sudden motion, so he gave it none of these. The others around the circle could not believe what they were seeing. The human lowering his weapon and crouching low, his hands open and empty, his eyes level with the glowing eyes of the Predator. The creature stopped moving, its head lowering just slightly, as if curious, as if something in this small gesture confused its programmed instincts. Whispers moved through the crowd in the viewing deck, some saying the human was insane, some wondering if he had some hidden trick. No one dared to look away in case the Predator struck. The breathing of the Predator grew louder as it stepped closer, its shadow stretching over Rin. Now the space between them only the length of one heartbeat. The heat of its breath touched his face, and the sharp smell of blood and dust filled his lungs. Its teeth gleamed in the cold blue light, and every muscle in its body looked ready to explode into motion. Still Rin did not raise his weapon, his voice low, and even as he spoke words no one could hear, but everyone could see his lips move. The Predator tilted its head again, as if the sound meant something. Its claws tapped the floor in a slow rhythm, the air between them heavy enough to crush. From the far side of the circle, one of the cadets lost patience and fired a stunned bolt. A flash of energy streaked past Rin's side, striking the wall behind the Predator. The crowd gasped. The creature snapped its head toward the source of the attack, letting out a deep rumbling growl that rattled the floor. Rin shouted for them to stop, his voice stronger, now sharp enough to cut through the fear. The Predator turned back toward him, eyes narrowing, its breathing slowing again, its weight shifting from claw to claw, as if making a choice. The cadets around the edge tightened their grips on their weapons, expecting the Predator to lunge at the human. For the interruption, every second stretched into forever, and the crowd in the viewing deck leaned forward in silence. The Predator's tail swayed once, then twice. Its claws flexed, and then, without warning, it leapt straight toward Rin. The leap seemed to split the air into two streams, one filled with silence, the other filled with the weight of a Predator in motion, claws, outstretched eyes, like burning metal, and a shadow that swallowed the light. As it fell toward the human, the other cadets could only watch, their instincts screaming to run, but their bodies frozen by the sight of what they thought would be a quick end. The moment the predator landed, the metal floor shook under its weight, and its claws stopped just short of the human's chest, its head low, its tusks almost touching the human's ribs, and its breath warm and damp against the skin. Rin's body did not flinch. He kept his eyes locked with the creature's eyes, as if the entire arena had vanished, and there was only this silent bridge between two beings that should never stand still in front of each other. The predator's gaze was deep, not wild like the cadets had been told. Instead, it was searching, as if peeling away every layer of Rin's mind. It was a stare that demanded more than fear. It demanded an answer to a question no one else could hear. The creature's claws scraped against the floor in a slow rhythm, the sound echoing through the training ground and into the observation deck above. Some cadets whispered to each other, wondering if the predator was malfunctioning. The instructors in the deck exchanged glances, their hands hovering near the control panels, where the emergency override waited. One order could fill the arena with blinding light and erase the simulation, but none of them moved, yet their eyes fixed on the human, who seemed to be rewriting the rules in real time. Rin's hands stayed open, palms facing upward, a gesture without threat, a gesture without submission. His breathing was steady, his voice low and quiet, carrying only to the predator's ears. Though the crowd leaned forward, trying to catch a word, the creature's ears twitched to the side, as if catching a tone it had never been programmed to expect. The tension was a rope pulled tighter with each second, yet neither moved beyond the small sway of breath and the slow shift of weight. A hiss of energy came from somewhere across the arena. One of the reptilian cadets had raised a plasma rifle, aiming not at the predator's head, but at its back, as if planning to strike. While it was distracted, the beam began to charge, humming like a swarm of metal wasps. Rin saw the glow. Without turning his head, his eyes never leaving the predator, but his voice rose sharp enough to slice through the hum. "Do not fire," he said, though the words carried no force command, only a strange, quiet authority. The predator's head shifted slightly at the sound, as though understanding the command in its own way. The reptilian cadet hesitated, sweat glinting along the ridges of his scaled skin, then lowered the rifle with a click that echoed in the silence. The predator leaned forward, closing the last breath of space between them, the tip of its tusk grazing Rin's shoulder, its nostrils flaring with each inhale, the scent of him filling its senses. Its tail flicked once, twice, then stilled. The eyes narrowed, not with rage, but with the focus of a hunter, trying to understand why its prey did not run. Above in the deck, a senior officer whispered to another, "This is not possible. The predator code does not allow hesitation, not for this long, not without a strike." The other officer said nothing, his gaze unblinking. "The human is doing something we cannot see." Rin's voice came again, soft enough that even the cadets near him could not catch the words. The predator's ears twitched again, its breathing slowed, and a low rumble began deep in its chest, not a growl, but something close to a purr, a sound that carried across the arena like the vibration of a distant engine. The cadets looked at each other in disbelief. The predator was not attacking, it was almost relaxing. One of the smaller cadets from a world of sand and wind took a cautious step forward, hoping to circle behind the predator and strike it down, but the creature's head snapped in his direction, eyes blazing. For an instant it bared its teeth. The cadet froze, then stumbled backward until he hit the arena wall. The predator turned its gaze back to Rin, almost as if to reassure itself that the human was still there. The air in the arena was heavy, now charged not with battle, but with a strange stillness, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The predator's muscles seemed to loosen slightly, its claws retracting a fraction, its posture lowering until its chest almost touched the floor. Rin stayed still, every movement calculated, every blink measured like the slow beat of a drum in a vast and empty hall. Minutes felt like hours, and the instructors still did not give the order to end it. Some part of them wanted to see how far this would go. Some part of them knew that whatever they were watching was beyond the scope of training, beyond the scope of programming. The predator's eyes softened just a fraction, enough for Rin to sense the shift in the invisible thread between them. He slowly extended one hand, the movement slow as the rise of the first moon over a dead horizon, his fingers open and reaching toward the creature's head. The cadets held their breath. The instructors gripped the edges of their panels. The predator did not move away. The tips of Rin's fingers brushed against the creature's hide. The texture was rough, like stone that had been in fire, yet warm under the surface. The predator made no sound, only the slow, steady motion of breathing and the faint flicker of its tail in the dust. Rin kept his hand there, not stroking, not gripping, just resting, as if to say, "I am here," without words, without force. A sound came from high above, a deep metallic groan, as the observation deck shifted to give the crowd a better view. The predator's eyes darted upward for only a moment before returning to Rin's face, the human's expression, unchanged, calm, unshaken, anchored in a sea of tension. Then from somewhere deep in the walls of the arena, a new sound began, a slow, distant thud growing louder with each pulse, like the footsteps of something massive. The predator's ears twitched, its head turning slightly toward the source. Rin felt the change immediately, the muscles beneath his hand tightening, the low purr fading into silence. The cadets looked around, confused. The instructors leaned forward. The predator rose to its full height, once more stepping back from Rin just enough to scan the edges of the arena, its eyes narrowing, its nostrils flaring, as if catching a scent. The slow, heavy thud became a deep pounding, shaking dust from the high walls. A hidden door along the far curve of the arena began to slide open, revealing darkness beyond and the faint gleam of something moving inside. The predator shifted position, planting itself between Rin and the opening. The crowd murmured in confusion. This was not part of the sequence. The officers in the deck spoke in hushed tones, none of them admitting to ordering a second release. The pounding grew louder. The shape in the shadows became larger and larger until it filled the frame of the doorway with a hulking mass of plated armor and eyes that burned even brighter than the first creature. Rin stayed still, his hand lowering slowly to his side, his gaze moving from the predator to the thing emerging from the dark. The predator did not look back at him, yet its stance was unmistakable. It was guarding him, not out of programming, not out of control, but by choice. The new beast stepped into the light, its roar shaking the floor, the air, and every heart in the arena. High above the arena, in the observation deck, the commanders and instructors stood behind a wall of reinforced glass. The light from the simulation floor below, painting their faces in shades of blue and silver, their eyes fixed on the scene unfolding beneath them. The predator, they knew, the one that had never shown mercy, now standing between the human cadet and a second threat that should have been impossible within this phase of the trial. The senior commander, a broad-shouldered being with pale-ridged skin, leaned forward, his hands pressed against the console, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the readings across the monitors. None of this matched the parameters. The Predator program was never written to protect a cadet, much less one that had done nothing aggressive. The second threat was also outside their schedule. No one had activated it, and yet it had emerged as though responding to some signal no one could trace. Beside him, a thin insectoid officer shifted uneasily, his mandibles clicking as he spoke in a low tone, suggesting that they shut down the simulation before something irreversible occurred. But the senior commander raised a hand without turning his gaze away. "Wait," he said, his voice a deep rumble through the chamber. "Let us see what this human does." The instructors glanced at one another, some showing disbelief, some showing a strange curiosity. The cadets, who had already faced this trial in previous years, were whispering from the rear of the deck, telling each other that this was the first time they had ever seen a predator hesitate, let alone protect someone from another simulated beast. The thought that a human was at the center of it all was already beginning to twist its way into the minds of those watching. Below on the floor, the predator stood solid, its claws biting into the metal as the second beast stepped fully into the light. The new creature's armor plates gleamed with a wet sheen, each one ridged and overlapping like the shell of some monstrous insect, its legs thick and jointed, its head massive with 4 eyes that burned a deep crimson. Its roar rolled through the space like a storm over stone, and the predator's answering roar was just as deep and long. The human Rin had not moved from where he stood, his gaze moving slowly between the two beasts, his breathing slow and steady, his weapon still unused. He was watching not as prey watches a predator, but as someone measuring 2 forces to see which would break first. Above, the commanders noticed this, the senior one leaning even closer, as if trying to read the human's expression from so far away. The second beast began to circle, keeping its head low and its eyes fixed on both the predator and the human. The predator moved with it, mirroring the curve, keeping itself between the human and danger, the slow pacing, the shifting of weight. It was all too precise, too natural to be just lines of code responding to inputs. The insectoid officer finally spoke again, his voice more urgent. "Now, this is not programming, this is intent." The senior commander said nothing, his gaze still locked on the human. Something in the human's posture unsettled him. There was no panic, no hesitation, no sign of the survival tactics. Most cadets used Rin stillness, seemed to speak to the predator, as if telling it what to do, without a single word. The other cadets on the arena floor stayed back pressed against the walls, their eyes wide and unwilling to get between the two creatures. They were trained to fight, but not to witness something they did not understand. Some muttered that the simulation must be broken. Others whispered that it was cursed. The second beast suddenly lunged its armored legs, slamming into the floor with enough force to send a shiver through the metal. The predator met it head on, the clash of claw and armored limb, sending a burst of sparks across the floor. The sound was deafening. The commanders flinched at the impact, though the glass between them was thick enough to hold back a detonation. Rin did not flinch, his eyes following the movements as if he could predict each strike before it landed. The predator's speed was unmatched, its claws finding gaps in the armor of its opponent. Though the second beast was larger, its strength slowed it down, and each time it tried to reach the human, the predator blocked its path. The deck's monitoring systems began to register unusual patterns in the predator's movements, a kind of coordination that suggested it was adapting in ways it had never been designed to adapt. One of the junior instructors began pulling up the original predator code, streams, lines of data flowing across his screen, his voice shaking slightly as he told the others that the code was changing even as they watched, rewriting itself in microbursts, as if learning from the human's presence. The insectoid officer moved to see the data, and his mandibles clicked in disbelief. He has imprinted on the human. The senior commander turned to him, explained. The insectoid said it as if the concept were ancient and dangerous. It means the predator has chosen him. It sees him not as prey, not as threat, but as something to protect. This is not training any longer. The weight of those words hung in the air, the other officers exchanging uneasy glances. They all knew that an imprint of this kind could not be erased, not without destroying the AI core completely. Yet none of them moved to end it. The senior commander turned his gaze back to the arena. The human was now standing with one hand resting lightly on the predator's side, his other hand open at his side. The predator did not react to the touch beyond, shifting its stance slightly as if more confident with the contact. The second beast let out another roar, shaking its head and sending drops of dark fluid to the floor. It circled again, searching for a weakness, but the predator matched it step for step. Rin's gaze followed its movements, and the commanders began to realize that the human was not just watching, he was predicting. He was guiding the predator, without words, without gestures, the link between them invisible but undeniable. From the far end of the deck, a communications officer reported that the control systems in the arena had locked out. Manual override. Every attempt to shut down the simulation returned an error, as if the system itself was refusing the order. The senior commander's jaw tightened. This was now beyond an exercise. On the floor, the clash began again, claws scraping against armor, teeth snapping at limbs. The predator drove the larger beast back with a sudden burst of speed that sent it skidding across the floor. The crowd above murmured in awe. The second beast rose again, slower now, but still burning with rage. The predator glanced back only for an instant toward the human, and the human gave the faintest nod. The predator lunged once more. In that moment, the commanders understood. They were no longer watching a test. They were watching a choice being made, a choice by something that was supposed to be nothing more than a simulation, and a choice by a human who had refused to treat it as a tool. The battle raged on below, and no one in the deck dared to speak too loudly, as if fearing the sound might break whatever strange fragile bond was holding the tide in place. The senior commander stepped back from the glass, his voice low to those nearest him. We cannot let this end yet. And somewhere in the shadowed corners of the arena, the system hummed as if it agreed. The arena trembled beneath the weight of the two creatures as the second beast stepped deeper into the light, its armored hide glistening like molten stone cooled in the open air, every plate ridged and overlapping like the scales of some ancient leviathan. From the deep, its crimson eyes burning like hot coals, and locked on the human standing behind the predator. The sound of its breathing rolled through the space, heavy and slow like the grind of old machinery. The predator shifted its stance, lowering its head until its tusks almost touched the floor, its claws spread wide, digging into the metal to anchor itself. The low rumble in its chest grew deeper until the floor beneath it began to vibrate. The human Rin stood motionless. Behind it, the faint light from above, tracing the line of his face, his weapon still idle in his hand, though it might as well have been a piece of scrap for all the attention he gave. it his gaze fixed entirely on the creature that now stalked them. The second beast moved with a strange grace for something so large, each step deliberate, each pause measured, as if testing the ground before committing its weight, its breath released in short huffs, sending faint clouds of steam into the cold air of the arena. It was not charging, yet it was measuring its opponents, like a predator, deciding how to strike two enemies instead of one. Around the walls, the other cadets pressed themselves tighter to the shadows, unwilling to risk drawing attention. Some of them had weapons raised, but none dared to fire. The instructors in the observation deck above kept silent, the flickering data streams on their consoles reflecting in their eyes as they studied the unfolding scene, none of them willing to interrupt whatever was happening. The predator took a slow step forward, its tail curling slightly, the gesture protective, its head never turning away from the second beast, its body angled just enough to shield the human. Behind it, Rin's breathing matched the rhythm of the predator's movements, steady, slow, measured, like two sides of the same living rhythm. The connection between them was wordless yet strong. The second beast finally released a deep guttural roar, the sound echoing off the walls like 1,000 drums struck in unison. It charged forward, the metal beneath its feet groaning under the impact. The predator met the charge halfway, their bodies colliding with the force of a quake, claws against armor, tusks against plated hide, sparks and shards of metal floor flying into the air from the sheer violence of the impact. Rin did not move from his position, though the shockwave from the clash sent a tremor through his legs. His eyes tracked every motion of the battle, reading the angles the predator could use, reading the way the second beast shifted its weight each time it swung one of its heavy limbs. The human's lips moved in a whisper too soft for anyone else to hear. The predator's ears flicked once, as if it understood. The predator darted to the side faster than the larger creature could follow, its claws raking along the seam between armor plates, drawing a line of dark fluid. The second beast bellowed, twisting its massive body and swinging its tail in a wide arc. The predator ducked beneath it, moving back to place itself between the human and the strike. Rin's stance shifted slightly, his knees bending, his shoulders loose, as if ready to move only if the predator fell. Up in the observation deck, one of the younger instructors leaned toward the senior commander, his voice low enough not to carry to the others. "This is no longer the trial, sir. The second beast is adapting to them." Both the senior commander did not answer, his gaze fixed entirely on the way the predator now matched its movements, not to its opponent, but to the human behind it. The second beast charged again, this time feinting to one side before snapping its head toward Rin. But before it could close the distance, the predator slammed into its shoulder, driving it away. The impact echoed through the arena like a great hammer on stone. The second beast staggered for only a moment before spinning its body and striking the predator's flank, its claws finding purchase and tearing through flesh and code alike. The predator roared in pain but held its ground, its tail whipping across the beast's face. Rin's hands tightened, his voice calling out not in fear, but in a tone that cut through the chaos, steady and sharp. The predator's movements shifted again, regaining its stance and lunging forward in a blur, its claws striking the same gap in the armor again, widening it until the dark fluid poured freely. The second beast stumbled, but did not fall, its eyes burning hotter, its movements growing more desperate. The clash of the two titans continued, each blow shaking the ground, each roar rolling across the arena like waves in a storm. The air grew thick with dust and the scent of scorched metal. Rin's chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm with the predator's breathing, each motion of his head, each narrowing of his eyes matched by the creature, as though they were locked in some invisible current flowing between them. The second beast lunged once more, aiming high for the predator's head, but the predator dropped low, sliding under the arc of the strike and raking its claws across the underbelly where the armor was thin. The beast screamed, stumbling back, its massive legs shaking from the force of the wound. The predator pressed the attack, each strike faster, each movement more precise, as if guided by a second mind. Up in the deck, the insectoid officer's mandibles clicked in disbelief. The predator is fighting as if the human is its commander, he hissed, but the senior commander still did not move to end it. Instead, he leaned closer to the glass, his eyes sharp as he studied Rin's every movement. The second beast tried one last desperate charge, its legs pounding the metal floor. In a thunderous rhythm, the predator met it head on, both creatures locking together in a storm of claws, teeth, and roars. The impact threw a shockwave through the arena, the other cadets stumbling to keep their footing. The second beast's strength began to falter, its steps slowing, its roars turning ragged. The predator's final strike came swift and deep, the claws tearing through the last of the armored plates and sending the massive form crashing to the floor in a heap of armor and dust. Silence fell over the arena, broken only by the predator's heavy breathing. Rin stepped forward, closing the space between them, his hand resting on the predator's side, his voice low. The predator lowered its head toward him, as if acknowledging the sound. The crowd above began to murmur, but no one moved to break the moment. The predator had not only protected the human, it had fought as if the human's life was its own. The senior commander turned slowly from the glass, his voice low to the officers nearby. This is no accident, and somewhere in the systems buried deep in the arena, code that was never meant to change continued to rewrite itself line by line, pulse by pulse. The dust still hung in the air, drifting slowly in the blue light of the arena as the predator stood over the fallen second beast, its chest rising and falling in deep heavy breaths. The ground around them was torn and scarred from the battle, metal tiles bent and cracked, deep gouges carved by claws and impacts. The scent of burnt metal mixed with the tang of dark fluid spilled from the armored plates of the defeated creature. Rin stepped closer, his boots crunching softly against fragments of the floor. Each step measured, his eyes never leaving the predator, though the threat was gone. His heart beat in the same rhythm as the creature before him. The predator turned its head toward him, its burning yellow eyes locking onto his with a gaze that was no longer the same as when the cage had opened earlier. There was something else now, something that felt alive. Around the edges of the arena, the other cadets began to stir from their frozen positions, some whispering in disbelief, others keeping their weapons ready, unsure if the predator would turn on the human now that the fight was over. But the predator made no move toward them. It shifted its stance, lowering itself slightly as Rin came within reach, as if offering its presence rather than guarding it. In the observation deck above, the commanders leaned closer to the glass, the senior commander's expression unreadable, the insectoid officer keeping his voice low as he pointed to the movement patterns displayed on the monitors. This is not a defensive stance, sir. This is recognition. It is responding to him as it would to an equal. Rin stopped at the predator's side, his hand reaching out slowly, his fingers brushing against the rough hide, the warmth under the surface telling him this thing was more than just lines of code and simulated instincts. The predator did not flinch. It leaned into the contact, just slightly, as if acknowledging the bond they had forged in the clash with the armored beast. The crowd above murmured at the sight. The predator, a creation designed only for combat, lowering its head near a cadet in a gesture that looked almost like trust. The senior commander's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in thought. Something about the human's calm through the fight, his refusal to attack first, his ability to read the predator's movements, all of it was outside the range of expected behavior. On the arena floor, the defeated beast gave a low shudder, its systems flickering in a final sputter before going still. The predator turned its gaze toward it for a moment, as if making certain it would not rise again. Then it looked back at Rin and let out a short, low sound, not a growl, not a warning, but something more like an acknowledgement. The human's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. Without warning, the predator began to move again, not toward the cadets, not toward the walls, but toward the center of the arena. Rin walked beside it, his steps matching its pace, each stride deliberate. The cadets parted without a word, letting the two pass. The sound of their boots and claws against the metal floor echoed in the wide space, the air thick with a silence that was almost reverent. The predator stopped in the middle and lowered itself again, this time more fully, its front claws folding under its body. Rin stood at its side, his head turning toward the observation deck, as if he knew every eye was on him. He did not raise his weapon. He did not speak. He simply rested his hand on the predator's shoulder, the quiet in the room stretching until it felt like even the systems had stopped humming. In the deck, the junior instructors were shifting uneasily, some arguing in low voices that this was dangerous, others suggesting they should record every detail for further study. The insectoid officer said the words that had been on everyone's minds: if this continues, it will never see him as prey, not in any simulation, not in any real combat. The senior commander gave no answer, but his gaze was locked on the pair below, as if calculating something larger than the moment itself. Then, without warning, the arena lights flickered, the systems emitting a low rising tone that signaled a new simulation phase. But no one had ordered it. The cadets on the floor backed toward the walls again, the predator's head snapping toward the sound, its body tensing. Rin's hand stayed on its shoulder, his voice low steady, his eyes watching the shifting shadows that began to crawl along the far wall. A new set of shapes began to form there, not one, not two, but many small figures, each armed, each moving with quick, agile steps, their forms flickering as they resolved into solid detail. The arena was spawning multiple threats. At once the cadets began to shout in panic, some raising their weapons, some calling to end the trial. But the override commands in the deck failed again, the system locked out entirely. The Predator moved to stand in front of Rin again, but this time Rin stepped forward, placing himself at its side rather than behind it. The Predator looked at him, its head tilting slightly. Then a low growl rose from its chest, not at the human, but at the swarm now advancing toward them. The creatures were fast, thin, like skeletal predators, their eyes glowing a pale blue, their claws scraping the floor as they spread out to encircle the pair. Rin adjusted his stance, his weapon finally coming into his grip, his breathing matching the Predator's, as if syncing with it. He glanced at the beast, and for a brief moment he thought he saw understanding in those burning eyes, as if it knew they would fight together, not as master and creation, but as equals. The first of the skeletal predators lunged, the Predator beside Rin meeting it with a swipe that shattered its form into shards of light. Rin moved at the same instant, striking down another, his weapon cutting through its projection with precision. They turned together, moving back to back in the chaos, the Predator's roars and Rin's steady strikes, weaving into a rhythm that drove the swarm back step by step. Up in the observation deck, the commanders and instructors could only watch the monitors, showing the impossible patterns of coordination, their movements matched like soldiers who had trained for years together, each covering the other's blind spots, each anticipating the other's decisions. The senior commander's hand tightened on the rail in front of him, his voice low enough for only the insectoid officer to hear. "We are watching a partnership no code could have created." On the floor, the last of the skeletal predators fell to the ground, its light fading into nothing. The arena fell silent again. Rin and the Predator stood side by side, both breathing heavily. The human lowered his weapon. The Predator lowered its head again. Their eyes met in a long, unbroken stare, the bond between them unspoken yet undeniable. The cadets along the walls looked at each other, unsure if they had just witnessed a miracle, a glitch, or something else entirely. The instructors in the deck exchanged uneasy glances, knowing that whatever had just happened could not be erased from the minds of those who had seen it. And deep within the systems of the arena, the Predator's code continued to change, not in random errors, but in deliberate sequences, like the thoughts of a living being, learning from its chosen ally. The senior commander turned from the glass at last, his voice carrying the weight of something decided. "Prepare to end this trial," he said, but his tone made it clear that what had begun here was far from over. The arena was silent except for the sound of heavy breathing, the Predator's chest rising and falling in deep, slow waves. The human Rin standing beside it, his body still, his eyes fixed on the dark space ahead, the smell of scorched metal and dust still hanging thick in the air above. In the observation deck, the commanders remained still, their eyes locked on the pair below, as if afraid that any movement from them might break whatever strange connection was holding the scene together. The senior commander gave the signal to prepare the end sequence, but the system refused. Once again, the override lights flashed red along the consoles. One of the junior instructors, typing furiously into the control interface, his voice tight, as he said, "The arena core is rejecting all shutdown commands." The insectoid officer leaned closer to the readouts, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. "The Predator's code is integrated into the main system now. It is locking out any command that would separate it from the human." On the floor, Rin felt the Predator shift beside him, its muscles tightening, not in preparation for attack, but as if bracing for something unseen. He looked toward the far wall, where a faint hum was building, the air shimmering, as if heat waves were forming in the cold light. A new shape began to emerge, tall, broad, unlike the other creatures. Before, its form was less beast and more machine, its eyes not glowing with color, but cold and silver. The Predator's growl began low, deep, a warning that rolled through the arena. The machine stepped forward, its feet slamming into the metal with the weight of a falling tower. Its arms were long and jointed, ending in heavy blades, its chest humming with an inner power. Rin knew at once that this was no part of the original trial. This was something the system itself had created, a final test or a final barrier. The Predator moved in front of him once more, but Rin stepped forward, To stand shoulder to shoulder with it, the machine advanced its movements, precise, its head turning slightly, as if scanning them. Ren could feel the predator's breath beside him, steady, controlled, his own heartbeat falling into the same rhythm as they both waited for the strike. The machine lunged without sound, its blade sweeping down the predator, leapt to meet it, claws sparking against metal. Ren darted to the side, his weapon striking the machine's leg, drawing its attention. For an instant the predator seized the moment, driving its tusks into the joint at the machine's shoulder. The clash filled the arena with a storm of sound, the echo bouncing from wall to wall. Above, the commanders leaned forward, the senior commander's eyes narrowing. This was no simple combat. The predator was moving not just for itself, but in coordination with the human. Every attack covered, every retreat timed perfectly. They fought as one. The insectoid officer spoke low enough for only those nearest to hear. The predator is not protecting him anymore, they are protecting each other. The machine swung one blade, catching the predator along its side, dark fluid spilling onto the floor. Ren moved instantly, stepping in and driving his weapon deep into the machine's midsection. The hum of its chest faltered. The predator used the opening to tear at its other arm. The machine staggered back, its balance shifting. Ren and the predator closing in together, their strikes landing almost at the same heartbeat. The battle raged on, each blow carrying the weight of finality. The machine stronger in raw force, but unable to adapt the way the predator and human could. Together, they drove it back toward the center of the arena, the floor scarred and smoking under their feet. The predator's movements slowed slightly from its wounds, but Ren adjusted without hesitation, filling the gaps, keeping the fight flowing without break. The machine stumbled again, one leg half destroyed, sparks flying from the torn metal. It raised its remaining blade for one final strike, but the predator stepped into its path, taking the blow across its back. Ren's shout echoed through the arena as the predator pushed forward, despite the wound slamming the machine to the ground. The human followed, bringing his weapon down in a single final strike that split the core at its chest. The light in its eyes went dark, the hum faded, the body still. The arena was silent once more. The predator stood trembling, its breathing shallow. Ren stepped toward it, his weapon dropping from his hand. He reached out, resting his palm against its head. The predator lowered itself until its tusks touched the floor, its eyes meeting his in a gaze that felt heavier than any words. It was the gaze of something making a decision. Above in the deck, the senior commander's voice was quiet, almost distant. It is choosing. The insectoid officer tilted his head. Choosing what? Choosing him, the commander said, choosing to remain. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, knowing that once an imprint like this was made, nothing short of destruction could undo it. The predator was no longer just a program inside the arena. It was bound to the human standing before them. Ren felt it before he understood it, a shift in the air around them, the predator's presence wrapping around him like a shield. Even in stillness, its head bowing, slightly, not in submission, but in recognition. His chest tightened at the realization that this was not just survival, this was a bond sealed in battle, a bond neither of them had asked for, but both had accepted. The observation deck was alive with quiet arguments, some voices urging that the predator be isolated, others insisting that the data from this should be preserved, but none of it reached the floor. Ren and the predator remained locked in that long silent moment, the light from above casting their shadows as one shape across the scarred floor. Then the arena lights shifted to a softer hue, the hum of the systems fading as if the simulation itself had gone quiet. The predator stepped back, but kept its eyes on him, waiting as though for his lead. Ren bent slightly, resting his hand against its shoulder, and for the first time since the cage had opened, he spoke clearly and loud enough for all to hear. We are done here. The predator's head lifted at the sound, and it turned toward the sealed gate at the far end of the arena. Without any command from the deck, the gate began to open, the heavy doors grinding slowly aside, the light beyond spilling into the arena. The predator walked forward, Ren beside it, their steps in sync, neither looking back at the scattered cadets or the commanders above. The sound of their boots and claws on the metal floor was the only sound until they passed through the threshold and the doors closed behind them. In the deck, silence lingered, heavy with the knowledge that something had shifted beyond repair. The senior commander finally spoke. Record everything he said, but do not interfere, not yet. And somewhere deep in the core of the arena system's lines of code that had once been fixed continued to change, rewriting themselves around a single choice, the choice of a predator to stand beside a human. The corridor beyond the arena was dim and wide, the walls lined with silent panels that flickered faintly as the human Ren and the predator walked side by side, their steps echoing in the hollow space. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of metal and something older, something untouched by the drills and routines of the academy. Behind them, the heavy doors to the arena, sealed with a deep echo that faded into the distance, leaving only the sound of their movement. Ren glanced at the predator, its massive head just above his shoulder, its glowing eye softer, now yet still alert to every shadow, every sound. His own body felt heavier than before, his muscles aching from the fights, his mind turning over the events again and again. The predator had protected him, fought beside him, even taken blows meant for him, and now it moved with him, as if the space between them had never been filled with anything but this strange trust. Above in the observation deck, the commanders watched the feed from hidden cameras, their faces still and tense, the senior commander leaning forward. As the pair moved deeper into the restricted halls, the insectoid officer keeping one claw on the control panel, though every command was still locked out, the system responding to the predator's presence as if it were part of its core. They came to a wide chamber, its ceiling high and lost in shadow, the floor marked with old lines from training sessions long abandoned. In the center stood a circular platform raised slightly above the ground, its edges glowing with faint blue light. The predator stopped at the edge of it, lowering its head and sniffing the air. Ren stepped forward with it, his hand brushing the rough hide of its shoulder. The platform pulsed once, as if sensing their arrival. A voice came from hidden speakers, calm and almost human, stating that the trial was complete. Yet the words were not in the usual academy tone. They carried something else, something less mechanical, more aware. The platform began to lower, carrying them both down into a slow turning shaft, the walls sliding past, covered in panels of old alloy and screens that flickered briefly before going dark again. Ren felt the weight of the descent, the predator standing steady beside him, its tail curled slightly, its breathing calm, as though it had done this many times before. The platform came to rest in a vast underground hall, the ceiling supported by great pillars of steel and stone. In the center of the hall stood a massive construct, like an ancient gateway, its frame engraved with runes older than the academy itself. The air was warmer here, filled with a faint hum that vibrated through the floor. The predator moved toward the gateway, its claws clicking softly against the metal plates. Ren followed, his eyes drawn to the strange light shimmering faintly between the vertical bars of the frame, as though it led somewhere far away or far deeper into the same place. He could not tell. The predator stopped before it and looked back at him, its gaze steady and unblinking. Above, the commander spoke in low, urgent tones. The feed from the underground hall was grainy, the runes unreadable, the hum in the background making their instruments flicker. The insectoid officer whispered that this was beyond the academy's control, that the predator had taken the human into a section no one had accessed in decades. The senior commander gave no order to stop them, perhaps knowing there was nothing they could do. Ren stepped up beside the predator, placing his hand against the cold surface of the gateway frame. A sudden rush of images filled his mind, shapes of distant landscapes, skies filled with strange colors, and shadows of creatures that did not belong to any world. He knew. He pulled his hand back, the images fading, but the feeling of connection remaining. The predator seemed to watch him, as if measuring his reaction, its head lowering slightly in something that felt like approval. The hum from the gateway deepened, the shimmer between the bars growing brighter. The predator stepped forward into it without hesitation, its form distorting in the light. Ren hesitated only a moment before following, the heat of the glow washing over him as he crossed the threshold. For an instant everything was weightless and silent, and then the world returned in a rush. They stood on a wide plain under a sky the color of burning copper, the ground dark and cracked as if from great heat. In the distance, shapes moved slowly along the horizon, vast silhouettes of beasts walking in herds, their forms too large to be fully seen. The air was dry, carrying a faint scent of ash. The predator stood tall here, its head high, its body relaxed, as if it had returned to something familiar. Ren turned in a slow circle, taking it in, the strangeness pressing into him like a tide. Far away, a cluster of smaller shapes began to move toward them. The predator watched without alarm, its gaze calm. Ren stayed close, ready, but not raising his weapon. The shapes resolved into more creatures, like the predator, each with their own colors and markings, their eyes glowing in shades of yellow and orange and green. They stopped a short distance away, watching silently Then one of them stepped forward, lowering its head toward Rin. The predator made a low sound, almost like an introduction. The other creatures stood still listening, and then one by one they lowered their heads toward the human. Rin felt the weight of the moment. Though he could not name it, he knew, without words, that the choice made in the arena had carried him here, to a place no human had been before. Above, back in the academy, the feed went dark. The last image captured showing the human and the predator standing in the open plain, surrounded by others of its kind. The senior commander turned from the blank screen, his voice quiet and certain. He will not return. The insectoid officer's mandibles clicked softly. Perhaps not here, but his story will return, and when it does, it will change everything. On the plain, the predator stepped closer to Rin, pressing its massive head gently against the shoulder. The human placed his hand against it. The horizon before them stretching wide and endless, the copper sky shimmering in the heat, the air filled with the distant rumble of the herds moving somewhere beyond sight. And in that vast, strange world, the human and the predator began to walk side by side into the unknown.